music. I like it. I like it. I like it. I like it. Gotta relax.
This is Earth Radio. And now here's human music.
Human music. I like it. I like it. I like it. I like it. Gotta relax.
This is Earth Radio. And now here's human music.
Human music. I like it. I like it. I like it. I like it. Gotta relax.
This is Earth Radio. And now here's human music.
Human music. I like it. I like it. I like it.
Hello, friends, ladies, and gentlefish. We're back once again on this fine Wednesday. As Lizzie Bell is in the background there getting ready for work. No! We are continuing on with our sexy mushroom pinups. So we've got a few things to show off actually. This is what we did last stream, which was very nice. We also have, let me just open up these lovely set of mushrooms. So I did a set of different colours for us to play around with. So we had the standard red that we started with, and then we sort of branched out from there. I basically just changed the hue of this cap at the top here. So we've got a few different colours as options. So these are going to become prints in various different colours across these various different hues. I don't know how many of each print I'm going to do, but we'll see how that goes. So they will be available in my Etsy store at some point once I get everything all sorted and happy. And we're also going to make an animated set, which will be available for digital download, which will basically be this this set here, but with a well, I guess it would be sequentially evolving color palette. Basically, this top cap will cycle through these color ranges back and forth, and that will sort of be the artwork. So that's going to be my launching of my NFT. It will be a non-fungible token, and it will be available for purchase. So that's going to be a nice digital download that people can purchase if they so wish. And I'm not sure, I might do that as a charity run, just as for short of shits and giggles. But we'll see how we go. If I can find a reasonable charity to go with our mushroom-based theme here. The other thing to show off, if you are subscribed to me, you will be super happy and lucky to know that that we've got some new emotes. So we've got this lovely door for Lizzie Bell, because she's a door.
Think you'll find you're the door.
Then we've got this mushroom love, a little bit of mush love, because you can't go wrong with some mush love. And then the most exciting of all, I was super happy about this one being the case. I was worried that I was going to have to wait for ages to unlock this, but Twitch decides to change its things and its features all the time. So I have unlocked an animated emote, and we've got these adorable little wiggly mushrooms. I still have one more animated emote slot, so we're gonna come up with something else, and we might do that on stream today. We'll see how we feel. I'm gonna try and do at least one other pinup mushroom first, and then we'll get back to that. So I'm just gonna save these as we go through. And we'll probably leave this one open. But yeah, these are our ideas for our other mushies that we can do. We've got this like button mushroom, a little white cap. We've got this one, which is going to be one of those net mushrooms. I don't know what they're called. I'm going to have to Google it. I should Google it now, actually. Quickly Google that. Net mushroom. The bridal veiled stinkhorn. Amazing. That's a name. But yeah, that was one of the options. And then we've got this this morel, this hunky morel. And then we've got this pair of mushrooms that I hadn't really modeled their caps on after anything in particular. But I think I'll figure that out as we go. Maybe I'll do like a Mascaria, like a fly Ascaria or something, for those two who are doing the sexy terms. So those are our 4 options, or we could come up with a new one. But I'm thinking probably one of these 4 we'll give a go at. I think, being the equal opportunists that we are, given that we've done a sexy lady, maybe we should do a sexy man, and that will be today's attempt, or at least today's first attempt. So we're working off an A5 canvas, and this is sort of our design. Actually, I don't want to do that. I want to put it on a new layer. There we go, and I want to chuck a bunch of extra layers into here because we're gonna layer our color palette through. So you get to see how I work, which is fun for people who haven't. I've got my water here. I've been hydrating a lot, so I might have to bio break a couple of times, but that'll be entertaining in and of itself. Self-care is very important. Make sure you look after yourselves, ladies and gents. Now, I wanted to keep navigation on here. But I do also want to play with my layers. Is there a way? Put that as navigation. No, that's not what I want to do. Damn. Layers. Can I make a third? Can I make a side one? There we go. We shrink this down. No. Shrink this down. Okay, we can shrink that. Shrink that slightly. Come on. No, won't let me shrink any more than that. Alright, that'll have to do. Can we see just briefly up here that I'm working on these various different layers? That should do, I guess. Basically, what I'm trying to do with this section here, I want to show you that we're working on our various different layers. So we have our top layer here, which is where all our detail is located at the moment. We're going down a few layers at the moment, and we're going to work on this layer, which is like second from the last. We're not using this background layer; it's just going to stay white for now, and then we're going to delete it later because we don't actually need it. So we want to work on the second last layer. That way we can put things underneath. I know we can move things around, but it's easier just to have it all set up. This color palette here is what we're going to be working off. So we have this full range of colors on the side here. If we cycle through. And then we have our sort of XY coordinate for the actual, I guess this would be tonal value? The shade or tint that we want to use. Shade being if you add black, tint being if you add white, and then we have our straight hue at the very top here. So we're going to start with something here. We probably want it to be a little lighter than that. We're going for a slightly more grayish tone than our last one, which will then colorize and fix up later. But we want to start with simple tones because that's the best way to work. And then we have our navigation down here, which is basically just the entire image. The reason why I want to keep that there is because there's going to be times at which I am zooming super in, and you're not going to be able to see much detail, but you'll still be able to see down the bottom here our design. So that's an explanation of what we're doing. Ish. I'm going to start with, how big's that? A little bit bigger than that. Something in the 40s. Maybe a little bigger, 50? 60? 60 will do. There you go. Perfect. First try. And we're going to leave the opacity and the hardness up, I think, because we're basically just filling in color. Yeah. We just want to fill in all of this space so that we have approximately the shape mapped out. And then we'll go in and start adding in our detail and sort of like highlights and shading and stuff, and that will build into our design. That's how we sort of make our design that way. But this is sort of the initial step. So you start by just blocking out areas of color that you intend to use, and then you cut them back. So last art stream I talked about cutting, where you take in sections that you've already colored. So we've done this whole big thing. If we take away our lighting layer, our line at the top, we've just got this kind of colored shape. And what we're going to come in and refine each of this. So we're going to come in with our eraser and like take out little bits that we don't need to refine it down. And then we're also going to come in with our various different colors and and put in our, you know, our shadow and our highlights and shading and stuff. Hi, are you leaving?
Yeah.
Okay. You're the best. Love. That's Lizzie Bell off to work. Some of us have to work. Unlike us lazy-about artists. How dare.
No, I'd rather you do art than teach.
That's it. I'd rather do art than teach, but that's the job. So we'll do it for a bit until we can get out of doing it. But I'm happy to teach all you lot out there on the internets. It's just annoying children that I don't want to deal with. Alright, so that's sort of the very basic shape that we want to go with. We've put down our first color swatch, so you might have seen, if you watched all of the last stream, we had these little color dots up the top here. That's just my current working palette. Sorry, my nose is a little bit... yeah, this is our color palette up the top here. This is keeping track of all the colors that we've been using thus far, and that way I can select back to those. So I can sample those colors and find the exact color I was using previously, so I don't have to guess or try and, you know, match to the same. Because what's likely to happen is that as I start brushing over the image with sort of lighter and lighter opacities, love, drive safe. I shall. As we start going over it with lighter and lighter opacities and different hardnesses and stuff, the colors are going to change as I lay them down. As I start putting darker colors over the top of lighter colors and different color shades over the top of each other. So as we start like moving into our oranges or into our greens or back and forth from our reds and stuff, we're going to get different colors. So if I want to put it back to the original set of colors, or if I want to go over it again with a standard color that matches the rest of the base, I'm going to need to select from that palette up the top there. It also gives us a good way of starting with just basics, so I can go from here directly down, and that will give me a darker color of the same register. So like that. And then directly up gives me a lighter color of the same register. Lighter again. Alright, that's probably good enough. I probably don't need a black, because that would probably be too dark. And yeah, it looks to be. So we'll get rid of that. We don't need that one. I'm happy with these 3. 4. I usually work with 3. But I'm okay with those 4, so let's just chuck those down. There we go. And now we're going to build in, I think we want to start building in our shadows first. So we're going to turn our hardness down a little, and we're going to turn our opacity down. Not too much, just enough that there's a difference. And then we're just going to block in. Oh, sorry. I'd carry. Which, you know, for a white boy like me. My stomach doesn't handle things at the best of times, but it doesn't handle a lot of things, so there's that. To the white folks out there who find that mildly offensive, which, you know, it kind of is. Apologies. Is a joke. In the same way that it would be offensive if I, you know, suggested someone of another race was not handling the taste or fattiness or whatever, or spice of a thing. Anyway, that's another discussion for another time, I think. There'll be controversial discussions tonight at some point. I'm sure there always is. That's kind of part and parcel for my stream. Which is probably not the best, but you know, it happens. It happens. All right, so we've got a bit of shape in now. We're gonna turn off our. See, there you go. So even without our guidelines now, we have a general structure of what it is we're trying to draw, which is good. We'll now go with our highlight, or our first highlight, and start sort of roughing in our highlight colors. So we're kind of going to imagine that our light source is above in this. So coming from the top looking down, which is not a perfect sort of show, but it's good enough for this. It gives a general approximation. The light is coming from up here somewhere downwards, so anything on the top of the image is going to be lit up to some degree. So there you can see, like, the shoulders just underneath where this cap would be is going to be darker, but on the shoulders where it peaks out there's going to be a bit of light coming in. We've got sort of just the front of these biceps, hint of light underneath slightly, but that could probably be blended out a little bit. And then we've got sort of the shoulders, the top of the bicep, no, those, yeah, pecs, biceps, there we go. Top of the pec, and then top of the bicep. The quads at the back would be darkened. On the forearms, the bottom's darkened, and then we probably have some light on the tops of the fingers here. That's what these are supposed to be. I'll clean up the hand later. The top of these calves, thighs, calves down here. Anatomy is not my strongest suit. That's why I was never really a portrait artist, if I'm honest. There we go. Alright, and then we go with our super highlight. And this is just for bits that are like directly within the light. There's not going to be much of this. And the idea of this is just to provide some extra highlight, some extra image. So there you go. That's sort of it. We can see now it's coming out a little stronger. We can see more of the detail in there that's supposed to be in there. We're going to clean this up a little, I think. So we're probably going to take some of this top away, because I don't know, I think this could probably actually be a little bit cleaner. But we'll start with this and see how we go. The idea being that we're probably going to take away this top layer and we're going to redo it using the sculpted model underneath. But we'll keep working for now. I'm just going to clean up some of these edges a little. It is Wednesday, so it is not bin night for us, so we don't need to go and do anything afterwards, luckily. I have been watching through, and I will probably later continue to watch through the 13th season of Doctor Who. I have heard mixed reviews, which is partially why I got to it late, partially also, I mean, not late, but later than when it first came out. Partially because I struggled with the end of season 12. I think all the hubbub and fuss around Jodie Whittaker as the Doctor is a little overblown from some people. I understand where they're coming from. I can see the issues. Absolutely. I think the majority of those issues are writing based rather than Jodie Whittaker as a actor. But there's definitely there's a distinct change in the sort of tone of the series and the sort of way the Doctor is presented, I guess. But each actor has brought something unique to the Doctor. So that was to be expected to some degree. I think there are a lot of people who are being shitty and nitpicking about the fact that the Doctor's a woman just because she's a woman. I don't think that's all of the criticism. But I think there is a degree of the series would be treated a little bit more leniently, and previous, seasons have been treated more leniently, because the actors in the series was very similar to what it was previous to. Not just saying because they were men, but because it was following a consistent line from previous to current. People don't like change. They do like new things. So there's a pretty big juxtaposition in that. But basically what I mean by that, and also why a lot of other series are having trouble with this same issue at the moment, is that if you have a franchise, if you have something that is already an established something, people dislike, or seem to dislike, because I won't speak for everybody, seem to dislike when IPs are changed around rather than being improved upon. And, arguments could be made that people are trying to improve upon them and all that. So here's the point at which we're going to do our... Oh, that is way too small. 6 big enough? 6 is big enough for now. We'll go in and fix that up in a minute. What was I saying? Sorry, I'm trying to choose my words carefully because both sides of this discussion have a tendency to get annoyed if you don't agree with their particular point of view, or if you don't make a particularly nuanced point of view about it. That is the case for literally both sides of this argument. So before someone starts going, yeah, it's them. The issue I often find with this sort of style of discussion from other people is that they will judge the other examples of things harshly and ignore sort of the failings of their own side's creation or production. And because a lot of these things are also then subjective, there is the issue of having something that is a subjective issue that you have and claiming it to be objective. Something is objectively bad because you personally don't like it, which is often not the case. There are situations in which that is the case, that something is just objectively bad, but it's rare that you as a subjective person can make that distinction or make that determination, because you as a lone individual are yourself subjective. And so it's very difficult to make an arbitration that something is objectively bad from your particular point of view, because your particular point of view is in itself subjective. If that makes sense for people. Why that is important for this discussion, because and very specifically, sorry, give me a sec. I will just briefly reply to this. Apologies. So professional, I know. Alright. Apologies. Where were we? Oh yes, controversial opinions. Things that could get me in trouble. I was on a roll somewhere and I got distracted. Something about why this is a problem, blah blah blah. Basically, the idea or the issue is it's really difficult to be actually objective in things, and many would argue you actually can't. And while I'm not sure I'm necessarily in the camp of you actually can't be objective ever, I do think it's incredibly difficult, and there are a lot of people who think their subjectivity is objectivity. I think that is the case for most people. And that's kind of most people in all walks of life. I think it's quite rare for people to have the whole picture worked out. I have not drawn this correctly. There we go. Hands and wrists are fucking difficult. Here we go. That's a little closer to something that looks like a hand. Oh, I'm butchering this. Anyway, moving on. So yeah, the objectivity thing is difficult. So most of the arguments are actually subjective arguments, and then there is the consensus thing of like, well, X number of people agree with me, and therefore, I am correct, or whatever the case is. That's all well and good, and kind of fine as a point to make, as long as the consensus is actually legitimate. And what I mean by that is, A, do all the people actually agree with you? And B, are they agreeing with you because what you're saying is actually true, or are they agreeing with you to be part of a group that says that, X thing is true? Do you actually think that Jodie Whittaker's doctor is a bad doctor, or the worst doctor, or whatever, based on, the fact that you believe the writing's terrible, and that she's a terrible actor, and that it doesn't feel like the doctor, and that they take actions that the doctor never would have taken, and there's parts of the storyline that don't match up with doctoriness, or whatever the case is. That is not the line, that is the line up there. I'll get it right. I will. There we go. That's it. Much better. Yeah. Is that an objective truth? Is that reality? Or is that based on some sort of unified agreement based on, social groups and camps and ways of thinking? Because not to say that I agree on either side yet, because I haven't actually given my opinion on the series. But there is a lot of that going around, and that's why this is a difficult discussion to have. This is why this is a difficult thing to talk about. The difficulty of it being that that if I disagree, people will place me in one camp. If I disagree that the series is good, then I get put in one camp. If I agree that the series is good, then I kind of get pigeonholed into another. And I wouldn't really consider myself to be of either camp. So the writer for much of the Whittaker series, I love Doctor Who, by the way. Just before we get into actually talking about the series itself, I'm a big Doctor Who fan. Have been for a while. My family's Doctor Who fans. I got put onto it because of my family. They're basically all English in some capacity, or from the UK in some capacity. I was the first one of my family, I believe my entire family, to be born, definitely my entire family to be born in Australia, but I'm pretty sure my entire family to be technically born overseas, as in outside of the UK's jurisdiction, with the exception of like independent Scotland and Ireland. So we're trying to make this look pretty morelish. That's the mushroom we're going with today. Making this sexy morel mushroom. So yeah, I'm a huge fan of the Doctor. I've loved all the Doctors. I very recently watched the Eccleston. This is where it all started. We started watching the Eccleston series, my partner and I, because I had not seen it up until this point, which I know is kind of blasphemy. But the problem with it is I didn't have access to it originally because I knew about it during the Eccleston era, which is sort of like 2004, but I wasn't myself watching it. Oh, my stomach is off today. But I wasn't already watching it yet, and by the time I was like, yeah, I should really get into it, and lots of people were sort of pushing for me to get into it, and my family finally, started themselves watching it, and therefore me as well. We'd sort of missed the boat with Eccleston. His run had finished. We were partway through the first season of Tennant. So I didn't catch all of that, but I did go back and watch it. Because, VHSs and then DVDs were a thing. And so we were watching DVDs of the reruns, and then watching them on TV as we sort of actually caught up. So I have now seen the whole thing. I am almost fully up to date. I'm watching the 13th season now, Flux. Alright, so we're going to need to put some smaller... So these are kind of like the holes of the morel. Morel's got this like wrinkly surface to it. So some of these are deeper wrinkles, some of these are not so. And we're going to have to go in and edit this slightly to make it sort of all match up, but that's fine. We can do that. That's not a problem at all. Where was I? By the way, if anybody wants to talk about anything in particular and wants me to stop rambling, please do let me know. There's an option in the channel points to choose the type of discussion we have. Alternatively, you can just suggest a topic and I'll probably pick it up, depending on what it is. So you can force me to talk about things if you want to. But you have to use channel points to do it. Otherwise, you can suggest something, and I'll probably end up talking about it anyway, because, let's be honest, that's who I am as a person. Yeah, so I've kind of danced around this long enough, I think. But I thought Whittaker's Doctor is not the best Doctor we've had. I really like Eccleston. I really like Capaldi. I think every season of Doctor Who has had its good moments and its bad moments. It's had its not very Doctor-y moments, and it's had its, this is definitely the Doctor moments. That's fine. Where we get into some difficulties, I think, is the tone of the series changed quite a bit, and the writers took a lot of liberties with things, sort of starting around Capaldi, and extending through into Whittaker quite heavily, where previously a lot of the series has been social commentary and kind of trying to hold up a mirror to society and morality and things like that. It has gotten a little bit more blunt with things, and you could fairly argue that that's because, you know, the writers feel like they live in an era in which, A, that's appropriate, and people can sort of rightly disagree, and to some degree I think I would disagree with that notion, but there are lots of people who don't. They think if you have a platform, you absolutely should be using it to say something about something, anything, your particular point of view, and believe that to be the appropriate response to that privilege, I guess. So they think it to be a responsibility in that scenario to address issues within society, and to specifically point them out as problems to people, point out particular ways of being, as you know, issues are problematic or whatever the case may be, and then further certain narratives. You know, if that's what they believe is the appropriate thing to do, good on them. They're the ones making the show. They're welcome to do so. If people don't like that, then they'll stop watching, and if they stop watching, then, you know, the show fails. And if it fails, then that's sort of the response or the answer to that. It's kind of the vote with your wallet type thing. Free market economy, all that kind of bizzo that, you know, most capitalist societies are built on. But aside from that as an idea, there's also then sort of the critique of the series itself and how it functions. Where previously the point of characters, certain characters, most characters within Doctor Who, and most TV shows or films or whatever, but, you know, specifically within Doctor Who, has been to explore a particular mindset as a way of just exploring a narrative structure around like a morality or a way of being. Doctor Who previous to has been very good at that, and has made a significant point of trying to approach its world with that mindset of trying to point out, well, this is flaws that people have, and this is why they should be avoided, or, you know, whatever the case may be. Reasonable things. So I'm just trying to figure out where this should be through here. Might actually lighten all of this. Come back and we'll give it. We'll see how we go. I'll just lighten parts of it and then see how we do. This is all still kind of a draft map until we officially figure out what it is that we want to do with this, and then we'll develop it a little further. So back to the conversation. My partner might thinks I might have ADHD, or ADD, and I'm starting to think she might be right, just a little bit. But also I've kind of painted myself into a corner. I started a conversation that is a difficult one to have when this is being recorded. But I try and be honest and open about who I am and what I think, because I think that's important. So I'm going to keep forging ahead. But anyway, yeah, Doctor Who was pretty good with its characters of them being like archetypes, being sort of stand-ins for different types of people or different types of moralities. The Daleks are all about like supremacy and purity. They're essentially racists. They're supposed to represent the, race above all else, no emotion but hate. They're essentially the KKK. That's kind of the idea behind them. And so you're not supposed to really feel sorry for them. There are a couple of episodes in the Doctor Who universe in which the Daleks then become, humanizes the Daleks is sort of one way of looking at it, but garners sympathy for the audience with them. Asylum of the Daleks is one. There's another one which I can't remember off the top of my head, but the sort of the premise of it is basically that it's like it's a good Dalek, and there's a few of those throughout. In the end, most of those end up, well, the Dalek recognizes the Doctor, and then one of two things happen. Either the Dalek itself is destroyed because it's unpure, it's not good enough of a Dalek, it's not good enough of a racist to be with the other racists, and therefore is warranted to be destroyed, and so it gets destroyed. Or sort of the sympathy aspect of it is it then recognizes the Doctor as recognizing it, and so that kind of self-fulfilling prophecy of, well, you are hate and therefore you can only be hate, and so the Dalek goes back to being a hate-filled creature, a racist. So it's kind of exploring the idea of like the allegory type thing. That's all well and good and fine and makes perfect sense. However, the writing of the characters in the sort of 11th, 12th season and now the 13th season is slightly less allegorical and a little bit more literal. And also has a tendency to be like setups. This character only thinks this way so that X other character can turn around and tell them off. And in telling them off, sort of says something to the audience either about that character in a kind of... I don't like using this term because I think it's got a bad rap, but like virtue signaling kind of manner. That's not to say that they're like, oh yeah, look, I'm so woke kind of thing. Like, not that, but just like this is trying to signify that this character thinks this particular way, shows off this particular virtue, and they are good virtues to show off. But they end up for the audience feeling quite forced. If you are on the side of, well, yeah, that's a bad thing, and so absolutely should be called out, you probably wouldn't notice that as much, and you probably wouldn't care as much. And that's fine, you don't need to. But for someone who's slightly more critical of the series, you would see that and instantly pick it up, and then be probably a little annoyed about it, because it means that character was only set up that way to be berated, essentially. And there was no reason for that character to be anything else, which means that they were never given a chance to begin with. They were stereotyped, essentially, is the argument. And given that one of the many points of Doctor Who is don't stereotype, it's kind of ironic that they're relying so heavily on that as a trope. So that's a thing. And I can see the annoyance one might have around that. If anybody's listening in the chat and disagrees, feel free to challenge me on any of this. because I'm kind of sort of simultaneously doing two things. I'm trying to present partially my point of view about certain things, but knowing that my point of view is subjective and therefore, you know, no one should take me as an authority at any point in time. Especially not about things that I am not an expert in. But then also trying to present the criticism from both sides to sort of give a nice rounded point of view of things. While we draw this lovely morale. But yeah, essentially the idea being that like a lot of the characters feel like setups for other characters, or feels like setups for points of view. A lot of the male characters end up as these kind of greedy buffoons who sort of need to be told off for acting the way they act. And a lot of the female characters seem to be set up in a way that they can clap back against, you know, some oppressive force. It has been a bit of a trope in Doctor Who altogether to have, you know, an overbearing male character that then gets told off by either one of the female companions or by the Doctor themselves or someone else. But I've noticed in the more recent seasons of Doctor Who, it's like consistent. Every single season, almost every other episode, there'll be a character that's specifically getting told off because they're old school, as in, for the time period, you know, bad, but not like super uncommon, or the character says something stupid that, you know, probably wouldn't have actually said if it was a real person in that situation, so that one of the other characters can be like, oh, that's a really backwards way to think, or, you know, that's really shitty, don't do that, kind of thing. These kind of like contrived scenarios that you know, don't really happen much, at least. And not to say that they don't happen at all, because they absolutely do happen, because, you know, shitty people are filled in the world. There's so many shitty people in the world. I fucking hate people. But there is an aspect of, like, this is... it's like a fantasy play in this scenario of you get to tell off, or you have the ability to watch, you know, your sort of stand-in. I forget what the movie term is, or what the art term is, for. It's like a void character, basically, a character that doesn't have a lot going on for them as a sort of, in terms of character development wise, so that you can be in the actual film itself. You see your relationship to the characters via this character. In Doctor Who, that's often the companions. You feel like you are one of the companions, and so in seeing the world through the companions, you experience the Doctor, you experience these alien worlds, etc. Because they're the unifying force. They're the human in that scenario that you interact with. Makes sense as a concept, and it's absolutely a thing that, you know, artists try and do. They put in a character. Another good one is in The Matrix. Neo in The Matrix is supposed to be a stand-in for you, in the beginning at least. As the series progresses in the next two movies, he goes from being you in that scenario to becoming this messianic character, the savior of the world. And it's still supposed to kind of be you in that scenario, but it's also sort of presenting further a little of like what you could be, what you should be, kind of thing. It's sort of then becomes a little, not preachy, but like further developed from what you as a reasonable person could be like, yeah, that's me in this world kind of thing. And then that's where things like allegory and stuff and it sort of develops further past a sort of like power fantasy or a life fantasy play and into something sort of further allegorical and a little bit more sort of detached from reality. You have to turn it into you have to sort of turn off that idea of who you are and what you think is possible so that you can then sort of put yourself in that character's shoes to a degree. This is turning out alright so far. But yeah, so that's sort of one issue that I've heard a fair bit, and that I've personally sort of noticed within the Jodie Whittaker Doctor. I think there are some very good episodes or good episodes. There's a couple of really good ones, and then there's a fair few good ones, and you know that's the same with all the Doctors. There are some very good episodes. I think the earlier seasons had lots of very good episodes. And then as time went on, you know, the ideas kind of dried up a little, and the very good ones became fewer and far between, and then it was mostly like good ones here and there. But there's still episodes that I will go back and watch, like out of sequence, just like, oh, I feel like watching this particular episode today. I've not found that in the newer seasons. There is a couple of Capaldi ones, the earlier ones, that I really enjoyed, and I still go back and watch. There is a couple of Tennant and Matt Smith ones. There's definitely some in Eccleston that I'm going to go back now and watch out of context because they're great. There's actually a few in Capaldi, I think, across his run. They're not bad. But in the newer ones, there isn't really one that I'm like, oh yeah, I would go back and watch just that episode. And it could be that I'm personally being a little harder on it than it needs to be. But they just don't catch me the same way. And you do not have to think the same way I do. I reiterate this all the time. And I think it's important to reiterate it all the time because some people think that, you know, someone starts saying something on the internet and then you have to agree with them 100%. I do not think that's the case at all. In fact, exactly the opposite. I think I'm, you know, a kind of irrelevant person to your life most of the time. There will be some people who are viewing this that might not be the case as much, but even then, there's very few people for whom my opinion matters or should matter that much. And even then, the should comes with a pretty big fucking caveat. That pretty big caveat is like, yes, but like, don't take everything I say to heart because you also have a say in literally all of these things, and so like your opinion of this matters as equally to mine, if not more, almost definitely more than mine does. And like, I think you should care what I think, but I'm never gonna make you care. I'm never gonna say that you have to care. And if you don't, then cool. Hey, Cog, how you doing, buddy? Thanks for the raid. Let's spam some bees for Cog. We'll leave a mush love and a mushroom wiggle in there. Actually, let's give you a proper bee swarm. Let's give you a proper bee swarm while we're here. Because why not? How was your stream, buddy? I'm gonna give you a shout out. Let's make sure I actually type it correctly. Cognitive beard. There we go. You'll have to let me know if you're hanging around or just raiding and leaving. For the raiders who came in and don't know who I am, my name is New Old Artist. I do art streams, I do variety streams, we play games, we do shit talking. It is an 18+ stream, so there will be swearing, there will be controversial opinions. I don't apologize. Good luck. Your emotes still haven't come through. Oh, thanks. I'm glad you like them. I also have a door as well. There you go. That's the new door emote. Aus Art. How you doing? You're hanging a little, but mostly going to lurk while you play with Calamity. You're not finished the gaming yet. Okay, cool. Well, enjoy. I've been whinging about Doctor Who, so if you wanna listen to that or stay in, I don't know, chat about that. That's up to you. But you're all good. That's awesome. Glad to hear it. We are doing sexy mushrooms at the moment. So this is the one we did last stream. This lovely one here, and we're now doing this grizzled fellow. He's a lovely morel mushroom, and we're just putting in our detail in between. You're just having a break in between server hops. Cool. You're happy to listen as best you can. All good, man. So basically, what I was going over was my sort of theorizing around the complaints people have around the new Doctor, Jodie Whittaker, and sort of comparing that or relaying that against, you know, the same criticisms for the other Doctors, and just sort of why that's the case. Looking at why that's the case, what I think about the new series, because I've started watching Flux, which is season 13, the newest one. For those who don't know, I am a Doctor Who fan. I've been a Doctor Who fan for a while. I've watched all of it up until the newest ones. I don't particularly have an issue with Jodie Whittaker necessarily. It's gonna come across really bad to begin with until you sort of hear how much I tiptoe around this subject. Basically, my position or my point of view in this is that I think Jodie Whittaker personally has gotten a bad rap from a lot of communities. A lot of the Doctor Who community, but also just like specific communities as well, have been particularly hard on her. And I don't think that's necessarily fair, given that a lot of the issues are actually in the writing, not necessarily in her personal representation of the Doctor, but also that she is not. She's not innocent in the issues that the current Doctor has. She is no longer staying on as the Doctor. She has officially said that she's bailing out. They are getting one of the old writers back. So one of the old writers is coming back, but he has essentially said that he is going to continue the torch of Chris Chibnall, who is the writer of some of the worst Doctor Who, but also specifically of Flux, of this new season. I think he in particular is kind of some of the biggest issues with this current season and with the past couple of seasons of Doctor Who. And then sort of more broadly, the BBC and how they've approached the Doctor is also a bit of an issue, and one that would benefit with being looked at a little bit more closely by investors and stuff. And they have also said that they're not particularly happy with the ratings. They're not particularly happy with how things have come out. You think this is a fair take? You've seen some incredible actors act trash in M. Night Shyamalan movies. Yeah, that's fair. So I think it's partly writing, and then she herself has come into it. Jodie Whittaker with some issues. Part of the complaint that a lot of the fans have had is that she didn't respect the role, and I don't think that's necessarily the case, but I can see their point of view, because where previously we've had doctors who were huge fans of the show, like mega fans of the show, knew everything about it, watched all the seasons, read books, the books that were brought out, listened to the radio plays by the BBC, things like that. And so they had an understanding of the Doctor, the world, the other characters, how they interacted with each other, and how that whole storyline was sort of supposed to go, how things in the Doctor Who universe worked, essentially. But also who the Doctor was and how the Doctor worked. Jodie Whittaker has come out very early on and said that she didn't watch any of the series. She didn't know anything about Doctor Who. She was just offered the role. And so she clearly approached it. She tried to, go with what people had said would be the appropriate way to approach this. And I think she did a decent job of trying to portray the Doctor the way previous Doctors have portrayed him, or them, because Time Lord can be either, and for better or worse, there is some dubiously canonical writing, but still canonical writing because it's from the original writers, saying that Time Lords can regenerate into animals and can regenerate into all sorts of alien species and blah 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 blah. It's a difficult, messy thing, and it makes people unhappy. But all of that aside, it seems like she did make an effort to try and sort of follow along with what the idea of, but it's like someone being on the back foot, and starting late, essentially. Starting late to what is a very lengthy lore, that she had to catch up on, and that makes it difficult to sort of follow along and watch, given that most of the people who are watching have an almost encyclopedic knowledge of this show, because it's sci-fi, and sci-fi nerds tend to be like that. It's not like most other, sitcoms or, American style TV shows. It has a long running lore that sort of flows from one to the other, and there's very particular ways certain characters or certain races or certain, species and things like that are supposed to act. And when they don't, that's a point that they're supposed to, know, both as a character but also within the world itself. That's an important point to bring up and to point out for characters. So if she doesn't know those things, that's very difficult for the audience to sit through, to be like, oh, she doesn't understand why, this character should be acting this way and isn't. And the other doctors, potentially might have picked up on that. That's also partly writing, but it's also partly her. So there's an issue there. In interviews, she did seem like she was not taking it as seriously as maybe she could have. I don't think that means she didn't respect it or grow to respect it, or have their own respect of it. Gandalf, yeah. Yeah, and to say an artist has to, or an actor has to, stick to the source material or understand the source material before they can create art, is a contentious thing in and of itself. But it was a sticking point for the audience such that people got upset about it. People were unhappy that was a thing, specifically. And I think reasonably so. I think that is a thing that, is a difficulty to deal with in this scenario, especially when things were changing within the Doctor Who universe, but particularly around, how things were portrayed. It was going out of fashion to do certain things and to approach discussions in certain ways, and so Jack Harkness is a good one. In previous series, he's kind of seen as this kind of lovable scamp, beloved horny man, as he's known by much of the community. And then in the new series, he's kind of tolerated more than anything else, and then he gets told off for, being himself. And he's well established at this point of being that character and acting that way. To have him then be, so broadly criticized because of it, kind of is difficult to watch for people, especially for people who really like the character, and who think the character fits into the lore, because, you got to remember, Jack Harkness as this kind of bisexual icon, this gay icon, this bi icon, was given representation in 2004 when it wasn't really accepted as a thing, and one of the few first gay kisses on Doctor Who, and then to now be like, well, it's hard not to see the backlash against it as oh, well, you're now the horny old white man kind of thing, rather than being the icon of the LGBT community that he was and still is. So that's a difficult thing as well to sort of stomach a little. Personally for me as a bi man, it kind of hits a little close to home of well, we were once part of this community and now we seem to not be. and then there's the sort of the setup characters, which is what I was talking about before, where there's a lot of characters that seem like they are there just to give other characters a chance to then tell them off, to show a moral, but like that's literally their only point for being in the there's one that comes to mind. I don't want to spoil it too much, but there's an army general in flux. You're gonna rejoin this conversation later. Happy hunting. Good luck. Enjoy your server hop. I will continue whinging. Yeah, so that's all a thing. That's not looking bad without our guidelines. Let's clean up our guidelines a little, because some of these are a little out there. Where are you? Here. There we go. Yeah. So that's an issue I'm having with the series, and that's sort of more a personal one, but it does make the characters a little bit two-dimensional or dry, in that they don't seem to be really responding as themselves. They're kind of almost like dolls. They're models to play with, and how you respond to them is more important than what it is they actually do, it seems. Especially because, like, certain characters will take an action and get, berated for it, and then other characters will take that exact same action in a different story, or even in the same story, and receive an entirely different response. That particular episode, the Sontaran episode, is an example of this. There are sort of three characters, well, sort of three times where characters do pretty much the exact same thing, and they're all treated differently based on who they are. And it's weird to see that in a series that's so focused on it's not who you are, it's what you do, to then turn around and make it again who you are is kind of weird, and feels uncomfortable, because it feels like we're sort of taking a step backwards. But then I don't know sort of how you approach that in a different way to... I don't know. And I don't think that's sort of, as I've said before, I don't think that's necessarily Whittaker's fault, or all Whittaker's fault. She has brought some things she has said that she's brought some things to the Doctor specifically, and that they've given her free rein to act as she wishes. So I'm gonna take her word that that's the case, that she is acting of her own accord. There we go. And why that might be important is because if it's her choice to, say, have her character tell off any white man, any older white man she comes across, with the exception of what's his name? The older companion who still gets told off quite a few times. It's worth noting. Graham? Is it Graham? Might be Graham. I don't remember off the top of my head. But yeah, that like that as a thing, as a scenario, kind of is a weird thing to experience, of like, get your licks in when you can, I guess. But yeah, it feels sort of kind of uncomfortable and not really uncomfortable in a like, oh, why are we being picked on as men kind of thing, but like this isn't who the Doctor was or has ever really wanted to be. There has been like, oh, well, this man is abusive and so he's a terrible person kind of thing, and fucking reasonable. Like, from day one, that's been great. The Doctor's called out abuse and called out, you know, assumptions of power based on sex or based on race or whatever, and they absolutely should. Where it gets weird is when it's like sort of almost gleefully done, almost for sort of no reason. Like the character says something that there's sort of really no reason for them to ever say, and then the Doctor makes a big show of telling them off. Anyway. And the criticism back to that is like, well, you know, all the other characters are being told off for years and being made to look stupid for years, and I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think in the past it's been pretty equal measure, that, you know, certain groups have been made fun of, but then other groups were made fun of, and it was pretty sort of, you know, everybody gets their share kind of thing. And whenever there was an issue, the companion made a point of pointing out to the Doctor that, hey, you know, that's a bit shit, you probably shouldn't have done it that way. And then the Doctor would either realise or, you know, have a spiral about it. But they'd eventually get to the point of like, yeah, you're right. That's, you know, that's not who I want to be as the Doctor. Whereas in this, that doesn't really seem to be the case much, if at all. There are some good sort of allegories in there for various things. They revisit the you know, don't attack someone who's retreating thing, which, while done very poorly in this version of the Doctor, I like the idea of that sort of storyline. There's a lot of Deus Ex Machinas. There's a lot of really poorly explained solutions to things that kind of almost look slapstick as they're executed, and that kind of bugs me, because while the Doctor has had sort of slapstick moments and had those moments of like pulling something out of nowhere, they kind of felt like they fit in a little bit better, or they were done specifically for, you know, for comedic effect rather than just within the confines of like, that's who the character is. And, you know, that might be a conscious thing on Jodie Whittaker's part to have the Doctor be a little bit more, I don't know, slapsticky. But I don't think it is. I don't think that was the intention. I think it was just that, you know, it's the impression she or the writers got of like the Doctor as this kind of has a solution to everything, God almost, but then wanted to like massively humanize humanize them, and then sort of place them up against the universe as like, you know, no one's above, not above the law, but like above the laws of physics kind of thing. Like, you know, there are immovable forces in the universe, and even your doctor can't get away from them, kind of thing like that. But then at the last minute still be like, but it's the doctor, so they're always going to win. And I have this criticism about earlier doctors as well. So if you're about to clutch your pearls and be like, well, Matt Smith's Doctor and, David Tennant's Doctor has done Deus Ex Machinas, and Matt Smith's Doctor does the slapstick thing as well. And I think the problem people are having, and I have had this a couple of times as well, is that Jodie Whittaker's Doctor seems like it's just an amalgamation of some of the previous Doctors. It's not really anything new other than the points at which she's kind of confused and preachy, I think, is sort of the only things I can think of that are like unique to this Doctor. Like turning to the camera and specifically breaking the fourth wall as a thing. I mean, not a full fourth wall break, but it's pretty egregious. Or like in sort of constantly telling off these other characters and sort of trying to make a big show of like, well, I and we are better than you because X, or like you should be doing this because X, Y, and Z. And that's tough. Like, that's tough to be around because people sort of don't like that kind of person. And so when the person you're supposed to be admiring in the Doctor does that, that's uncomfortable making. And there's an argument to be made that like these are things that we are supposed to hear, that we need to hear, and that we need to learn from, and they're supposed to be uncomfortable because if it's not uncomfortable, then you're not learning it. And if it's uncomfortable to the point you don't want to watch it, then you've missed the point, and you're the one who actually needs to hear it. That comes up a bit in sort of the discussions against it. But it's at a level that that previous Doctors have not done, and that's not to say a Doctor shouldn't do that, but it can be alienating for the audience to have that be the Doctor's thing, of like being kind of preachy and a little bit of an SJW. There's nothing wrong with having, strong morals and a particular, thing about social justice. Social justice is important, absolutely. Social causes are important. Doctor Who has always been about social causes. But I've noticed that, especially in the first season, the Doctor was almost like white savior complexing a lot of like POC issues. And I know that the point of it was supposed to be that, like, here we're now going to talk about, racial issues, and we're going to talk about these particular historical figures who are super important, but they weren't talked about previously. A lot of them were like in places that the sort of the general public of Britain sort of didn't interact with as much. And part of that is a cop-out because they should have dealt with it, and then also that like it was, some of the series did take place in America, so they absolutely could have dealt with racial issues more, and they did to a degree. They absolutely dealt with racial issues to a degree in a fair amount of episodes across the various Doctors. But there was a noticeable rise in it with Whittaker, and her job seemed to be, let's make sure that this person of color can do the thing they're supposed to do, and we'll make sure that they do it. Like, they specifically had to have a hand in doing it. The companion or the Doctor directly, rather than that person, that historical figure, doing it themselves. And that felt like a huge slap in the face to them. It was almost like too uncomfortable to watch. The one I'm thinking of in particular is the episode where they go to why am I blanking on this? Streaming brain, come on. They meet Martin Luther King Jr., Martin Luther King, and why do I not know this? Why is my brain blanking on this? Apologies. This would be a great time to turn around and say, oh, that's because you're racist. It wouldn't be the case, but I'm gonna Google it now and instantly remember who it is. But I'm terrible with names. I'm terrible with Rosa Parks. There you go. Yeah, so that they then sort of try and take away the sort of power from that moment, and then kind of force her into the situation in a like, oh no, you have to do this, but then that kind of takes away the agency of that character, and it just strikes me as wrong. Because of who it is, and you know, the fact that, you know, the Doctor is still white in this, so you know, bad time to approach that one. But then also they you know, they specifically choose Graham, the older white man, and then it's like it comes across like, oh, you know, we're trying to force this situation, and it's the, you know, it's white savior complex bullshit. So that's an uncomfortable one for me, and I think that was sort of written poorly and could have been done much better. And I think it had been handled better in previous series. Racial issues had been handled much better in previous series of Doctor Who. But again, that's a personal feeling that I had, personal gripe. It's interesting to see that same argument was kind of made by some left-leaning folk, but that conversation quickly sort of got shut down in favor of, you know, you can't criticize this Doctor, otherwise you're a sexist and a racist and blah 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 blah. So that's the thing. The thing that I really disliked, though, is the changing of the lore around, you know, who the Time Lords were, who the Doctor is, and I know why they've done it. They explicitly said why they did it, which is, in their words, to create new stories, because they were running out of stories, and they were running out of places for the Doctor to sort of go and see without it just being reruns. I think that's a fucking huge cop-out. But also, it kind of destroys a lot of the previous lore and a lot of the previous situations, and it calls into question a lot of stuff. And unless they retcon it in some fairly significant way, I don't see how you fix that. Spoiler alert for those who haven't seen it. Basically, the premise behind Timeless Children is that the Time Lords themselves aren't, as we previously thought, given their powers of sort of timelessness and regeneration, and their ability to have this sort of heightened sense of awareness through exposure to the untempered schism of time, the time vortex, which is sort of what was previously explored as an idea of how the Time Lords came to be, through sort of through technology, but also through where they lived on the planet Gallifrey. And instead, now, there is a timeless child, a species unknown, race unknown child, who was found at a portal by an explorer and a scientist. And then this explorer/scientist spent their entire life literally exploiting and experimenting on this child to steal their powers of regeneration. Then spliced it into themselves, regenerated, and became the first of the Time Lords. And then set up an entire system whereby they ruled over multiple planets, but Gallifrey itself, over the other citizens there by making themselves Time Lords and making other people not able to be Time Lords. And they put specifics on regeneration, how many regenerations you could have, and specifically made it so, the plebeians, the lower people, didn't have access to this power. That's super colonist-y, exploitative bullshit. And, as a storyline, yeah, sure, it's an interesting one, but that's not what the Time Lords were previously, and it also calls into question so much of the lore within Doctor Who. Then, how the fuck is Amy Pond part Time Lord? Because the only reason why Amy Pond is the way she is because she was birthed in the untempered schism, in the time vortex. If the power of the time vortex is not making people regenerate, if it's not the reason why they become Time Lords, not the reason why they gain regenerative powers, etc., etc., then how the fuck did they make Amy Pond? Is it that they then spliced Time Lord DNA? And then how the fuck did they get Time Lord DNA? If that's the sort of the inference there. Because the idea is that they spliced DNA of this timeless child into themselves so that they could become Time Lords. There is more to that story, and if you haven't watched it, you should go and watch it to be annoyed at it. But yeah, it breaks a lot of things. It makes things unnecessarily uncomfortable. Like it creates morally bad characters that were already sort of morally bad, but it makes them like excessively morally bad for no real reason. Like, it sort of turns the entirety of Gallifrey into this colonizer, culturally appropriative and physically abusive system, that where previously it was actually intended to be kind of more of the Star Trek thing of like, they've developed science beyond the point where they need to harm others, and so their society is very much a like, let's be hands off and just try and keep things running. Let's keep the world in order. We'll stop the bad guys from being bad, but we're not going to, force cultures upwards in science or force cultures to sort of, be like us kind of thing. It was literally just, okay, this is a world-ending event. We'll go and stop it because that's important. Otherwise, we can't intervene. That was supposed to be the idea. Then they put in the idea of the division. They put in the idea of this sort of like timeless child scenario, and then you have this really messy, uncomfortable situation that didn't need to be there. And I don't like it. A lot of people don't seem to like it. And I think rightfully so. Like there's an aspect of it there that like, why did you even consider this as a thing? But like, there's not a lot we can do to like, you can't challenge the idea of it once it's made because it's in there now, and you could sort of, there's a possibility that that once the new writers take over, that they'll be like, oh no, it like the master was lying, blah blah blah. There's also some other things in there that I think are some interesting points to point out, that like certain characters only get redemptions based on who they are to a degree. There's a little bit of like, there's a little bit of some racism and some sexism in there to some degree. Not in the directions that you would expect. And that's not great. But there has been an element of that through the older Doctor Who series, so yeah, that's kind of to be expected. And part of it was even in Capaldi's run, so he had his issues as a Doctor. That was a thing. So yeah, I don't know. It's tricky to sort of lay this out in a way that doesn't make me sound bad, because I think Jodie Whittaker is the Doctor. She played the Doctor. She is the Doctor. Her Doctor is the Doctor. That's that's how it works, and it's good enough for me. I'm happy with that as an idea. The issue for me is that the writing has sort of pigeonholed into a very particular avenue, a very particular position, and it's based on a particular sort of set of ideologies, and I don't think that represents the audience base very well, and I don't think it represents the who the Doctor was previously, and I can't say who the Doctor should be, because the Doctor is whoever it is, but who we would want the Doctor to be, I guess, is the better way of saying it. Alright, let's check out this honky boy. Ooh la la, looking good. Alright, so shading layer. We're now going to put in some more shadows. I need to fix up this hand down here. But yeah, so essentially my criticism boils down to There are definitely some issues with the season, with the series, with the way things are progressing with the Doctor, and I think it is more a reflection of how our society is dividing itself at the moment, and the sort of over-course correction of certain aspects of society. That we're getting to the point where, rather than having a compelling story, it's more important to tell off certain people, or to say, certain things in society are bad, and that's more important than a story is. Either that, or just the stories they wrote were so one line that's what they felt like, that it didn't feel like they were actually trying to tell us a story. It felt like they were just kind of preaching, just telling us off. Which is sad, because I liked that Doctor Who was a good social commentary, and it was a good social commentary for such a long time. And like, even within the first season and the first couple of seasons, there's some great points of like anti-sexism and anti-racism and things you wouldn't expect, and then like representation in terms of like LGBT and disabled and racial, and like, it's such a good show for them to turn around and mar it, because there's a lot of people who won't come back to it now. There's a lot of people who have sort of drawn the line, and there's an aspect of that I think is childish. I think you should give it a go, but at the same time, it's your life, and there's a lot of really good shows out there. So I get not wanting to. But that being said, also there's an aspect of, if the only reason you don't like it is because it's a woman, then that's shitty, and that should be called out. And there's a few people that I've met who that's essentially their response. They think the Doctor should have been a man, and so they're not watching again until the Doctor is a man again. Or they're not watching again until, Jodie Whittaker's character dies a horrible, horrible death, and that's the end of the discussion, kind of thing. And that's shitty. That's a particular level of shitty that I think is kind of too egregious to ignore, because it's not fair. Like, it's not all her fault that the character was like that, because some of it was writing, and the fact that she's a woman should not affect how the character is, received. I have heard their arguments to why, and I don't think they're good arguments. People saying that, it's supposed to be a doctor because it's supposed to be a man because it's about the Doctor's dynamics with women and the sort of the companions. It's about, his sort of authority in the situation, and that's just, social conditioning bullshit. I do not agree with that as an idea. That's stupid. If you disagree with me, fine, but like, I'm gonna tell you you're wrong. And I think kind of rightfully so. That looks pretty good. I'm liking that. Alright, let's get rid of our little color palette up the top here. And then we'll stick a background in the background. I'm going to keep our... So we've got our layers at the top here. We've got our original layer, which is shit, and we can get rid of that now. So we're going to... we have our line layer, which is looking pretty good. We've got our shadow layer, which is adding our definition in. We've got our color layer underneath, which is obviously adding all our color in. We've got this nice little drop shadow at the bottom, and then we're going to put in our background. We are going to add in another layer for our background. Actually, I think we probably do... I'm just going to copy this over and see how that does. We'll probably change this. But I don't dislike that. I think that looks alright. We'll probably darken it a little, I think is what we do. Now that we're here, we need to clean up some of this. Sorry that this conversation has been, you know, a little heavy and a little... I don't want to say preachy, but some of it's been a little preachy. But my issue has been... in the circles that I run in, and the content that I consume online, I've heard a lot of criticism of the Doctor, the Jodie Whittaker's Doctor in particular. And I've heard a lot of complaints about how she's portrayed the Doctor, and some complaints about, like, specifically the writer, Chris Chibnall. And I think that's a little bit more reasonable to present, because, like, the story arcs themselves are pretty dry, and, like, it's not the best. Yeah, we're still whinging about the Doctor. But at the same time, I think the criticism on her has been a little unfair. And so that's sort of my position, is I want to sort of give the reasonable criticism so the people who are unhappy feel validated, because there are reasonable criticisms to have, but then also push back against some of the, like, more egregious, well, she's shitty because she's a woman. It's like, well, no, that's not why it's bad. That's... and there have been those, which is why it's a difficult discussion to have, because there are some really shitty people who dislike the series now, and their reasoning behind it is kind of sexist. Not always, not for the vast majority of it. They have reasonable criticisms, but then they also have sexist criticisms sort of sprinkled within, and it's hard to sort of separate those two things. It's hard to say what is them nitpicking at things that they wouldn't have nitpicked at previously, because she's a woman. Like, they're being harder on her and being harsher on her because she's a woman, which is entirely unfair, because if you're not that critical of, you know, the previous series, and vocally so, then you are just being a sexist. It is just being shitty. But if you were as vocally critical of those, and then you're vocally critical of this now, for the things that it's legitimate to be critical of, then sure, that's fine. But just, it's different and therefore I don't like it, is not a good criticism. Which is kind of what a lot of, not a lot, but a fair amount of the criticism had kind of boiled down to, that I found. And that's kind of disappointing, because that does mean that a lot of it is rooted in... Yeah, Eccleston got us insane amounts of criticism. Some people didn't like Matt Smith, this is true. She has definitely earned some of the criticism, and the writers have earned a lot of the criticism in this one. Especially from me. Yeah, I mean, I'm in two minds about it. It's a difficult one to find where to draw the line on this. Because I can see the points being made of like, well, there are definitely people out there who are just shitty about it because it's a woman. Same thing with like the Star Wars thing, like the new Disney Star Wars. There are some legitimately bad things in it, and there's some things that you can point out that like don't make sense and probably shouldn't have been in there. And then there's other things that are like, okay, that it's literally the exact same thing happened in the original trilogy, and we hold those up as being great. So, like, sexism does play a role in this, and that's not good. It's also difficult to then hold a position that says, you know, some of this could use criticism because of the amount of people who are just disliking it because it's a woman. And that's rough. But like I pointed out, there is clearly criticisms to have, and that's reasonable. Yeah, and that's it. He's had a lot... Matt Smith had a longer time to sort of... Not a longer time overall, but like he's had more time just because it's been longer since he started to carve out a place in the community, and the writing helped a lot more with his character. He had a rocky start. There's some things that people don't like about how that Doctor sort of developed in some of the storylines, but overall, it was decent, and it played out fairly well. So yeah, that's about the end of our Doctor Who whinge. Apologies if a lot of it was just me repeating myself a few times. In these kinds of discussions, it's difficult to get the point across in a way that, you know, doesn't ally you to a particular camp, especially if you don't want to be aligned to that particular camp. I don't consider myself a hardcore leftist, and so I wouldn't want to be associated with that. I don't consider myself a right-winger, and so I wouldn't want, or a conservative, and I don't want myself to be associated with that idea. There are things I don't like about Jodie Whittaker's Doctor. There's things I love about Jodie Whittaker's Doctor. And I think that's the point. Like, if you can look at it reasonably and come to a conclusion that's nuanced and sees both the good and the bad, and then makes an overall judgment, that's the way it should be done. It shouldn't be based on, well, she's a woman, therefore everything is bad, or she ruined it because she did this, because that's not right. But equally, you should be able to criticize these things and not feel like you're, you know, a monster for expressing your opinion. You're not a sexist or a racist or whatever just because you don't like, you know, certain things that have happened in the Doctor Who universe. You don't have to be labeled a racist because you don't like that they did the timeless child thing and introduced the first black female Doctor. It's not because she's black and she's female, it's because they entirely changed how Time Lords work. Like, that's the criticism. And then there's a broader discussion to have about, like, diversity quotas as a thing. But that's in a weird dynamic of, like, kind of needed, but also sort of create an uncomfortable situation both for the audience and for the actor. And how do you best approach that scenario? Because that was another one I noticed in there as a criticism made by someone else. This isn't my criticism, but they couldn't help but noticing that one of the first characters to turn up in the new season was disabled. That they were missing an arm, or at least part of an arm. And I did notice that too, but it wasn't relevant to the character, so I immediately basically forgot about it. Well, not forgot about it, but, like, you know, back of the mind type thing of, like, it's not relevant, so it's just who that person is, and that's fine. Which is, you know, how it should be. But someone who knows about the BBC, when this was sort of brought up in a discussion that I was listening to, pointed out that the BBC has a quota of 9% of all people who are on screen need to be disabled in some fashion. So that means fitting in 9% of actors who are disabled. Awesome for disabled actors to be able to get that representation, to get that recognition, to be able to be part of shows where they otherwise might not have gotten shows. But then it comes into that weird thing of, like, okay, well, did they get the role because they were the most qualified for that role or whatever? And this is a side character, so it literally doesn't matter. But eventually it probably will matter, and that's where it then becomes muddy. A discussion I saw came up, and I'm hoping that this was a sock account, that this was not someone who is an actual person but was just sort of trolling, and they were saying an all-female Lord of the Rings. Literally all of the lead characters being female, like an all-female Ghostbusters kind of thing. And I was just like, but why? What does that add to the story that isn't just... Like, this, that's my question in this. I get the addition of the Doctor being female means that you add something to the story, that the Doctor has experiences that are gendered and then non-gendered. The Doctor was male, the Doctor is now female. They have experienced both sorts of life, both experiences in life, and they might eventually be gender fluid or non-binary or whatever. Time Lords in general seem to sort of consider themselves that way, of being slightly gender fluid in that they could regenerate into another gender. But at the same time, there seems to be this sort of weird, stereotyped, gendered performance as well, because then Jodie Whittaker's character is constantly complaining about, you know, men doing bad things and it's the men's fault. She specifically notes that a few times, saying she's, you know, she doesn't know why she bothers with Earth anymore because of men, or because of men like you, I think is the exact quote. And it's like, okay, that's a fucking weird line to have in a Doctor Who. Anyway, so that's sort of my thing of, like, I am uncomfortable. I'm kind of unhappy about it in some aspects. I'm hoping that they change course. But I don't think it's Jodie Whittaker's fault necessarily. I don't think anybody should boycott the series because of it. I think it's still worth watching. if you don't want to watch it, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But then it's a personal preference thing at that point. You know, at that point, you are making the decision not to do it, and you need to kind of be aware of why that's the case and be honest in why that's the case. You got into a scuffle earlier, so you couldn't respond. That's fine. I think one of the issues is whenever someone critiques Whittaker, they immediately get accused of sexism for it. And you're allowed to dislike her performance without thinking all girls are bad. Yeah. I understand the criticism some people make, which is that the question being, would you be as harsh on this if it was a man? I don't think that's the case for most people, but it definitely is the case for some. And so that's a difficult thing to navigate, especially because for some people they probably don't even realize that the issue is that she's a woman. If your issue is that you can't relate to her, then yeah, your issue is kind of that she's a woman. That's if the issue is that you don't like some of her personal points of view as the Doctor, then that's a little different. That's a little bit more reasonable, and at that point you can sort of start having the discussion. But it hasn't been super clear which side of the fence a lot of people were on and why they're on that side of the fence. And then there is that thing of like, people are just being labeled as sexist or whatever, if they have that criticism, and I think it's reasonable to have that criticism. So that's a dangerous thing, or an uncomfortable making thing, feeling like you can't criticize something because the gender is somehow more important than the acting or the character that's being portrayed. But at the same time, your personal dislike of something doesn't make the series itself bad. And that's another thing. That's something that I talked about early on in this discussion. At the start of the stream, was essentially that that because you can't be objective, like no one personally can be objective, really. You can be subjective for your personal taste and subjective for, how you respond to things, and then you can come to consensus, some sort of objective, in quotes, consensus with other people, or based on, historical experience of this is how something was done previously. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you are correct in saying that it's bad because X. Which is a difficult one, because that's what a lot of the critics are doing, is they're saying, this season is bad, this Doctor is bad because X. I don't like this about them. I don't like X about them. There are objective points that you could make, but you have to link that back to either previous data, previous experiences. The Doctor has always been like X, and so the move away from this is a bad thing. And yeah, absolutely, it also is the same for saying something's good. But there's a lot of people saying it's bad and you shouldn't watch it, and there's not a lot of people saying it's good and therefore you have to watch it. Most of the people who are like, uncomfortable that you're criticizing it and therefore call you a sexist or whatever, are not saying you have to watch it. They're just saying, well, if you don't like it, then it's not for you and you don't have to watch it. That's a reasonable position to take. Time it to our music. Oh, stopped for a second. yeah, I think that's a reasonable position to take. That you know, not everything is for other people. You've been literally forced to watch an episode by someone? Who forced you to watch an episode? Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't think that's a fair argument to make. But yeah, I've heard quite a few people online being like, you know, I'm never watching this until, you know, the Doctor's male again. You know, this is a bad because, you know, they put a woman in there and the Doctor's always supposed to be male or something. And, like, that's objectively within the law not true. So you can't make that judgment. That's a personal judgment. And then the other side of that argument is not saying, well, it's a woman, so you have to watch it. They're saying you shouldn't criticize it on the basis that it's a woman because that's sexist. You shouldn't be harshly criticizing it more than you would criticize other things. So as in bringing up an issue that's that happens in other series, because you didn't criticize it when it came up in Matt Smith's run, or you didn't criticize it when it came up in Capaldi's run, but you're criticizing it now in Jodie Whittaker's run because she's a woman. And I don't necessarily agree with that argument. I think there were people who were criticizing things, but they weren't vocal about it. They weren't, you know, telling people not to fucking watch it. It wasn't like most people. I think the fact that most people are criticizing it shows that it's also bad, because there's the consensus thing of like, well, you know, it's clearly not great writing if so many people are unhappy about it. But that being said, there's also a lot of people who seem to dislike it on inappropriate grounds for criticism. Which means agreeing with those people is difficult or dangerous. But you know what they say, a racist clock is correct twice a day. Just because it is making statements that you would not necessarily agree with does not mean that it's not also kind of correct in some aspect. At some point in time. It's just the reason they draw those conclusions might not be the best. You're building up to giving her another chance? Yeah, exactly. I would give her another chance if you can. Try and go into it knowing that the writing is not the best, but that, you know, they're doing the best they can, and so you should, you know, treat it gently. Treat it gently. Try and like it. I think that's the best advice I would have for someone who's coming into trying to watch Jodie Whittaker's Doctor and has previously not enjoyed it, or you know, whatever, is if you legitimately go into it trying to enjoy it and being like, well, this is Doctor Who, and, you know, think about the previous series, the previous Doctors and how they've gone, and like think about Torchwood and like some of the less good series that exists out there, the spin-offs that exist out there. Just try and give her the benefit of the doubt. There's some good stuff in there. There's definitely good stuff in there that you can enjoy. It's got some flashy visuals. Yeah, I don't know. I kind of preferred the old school visuals, if I'm honest. But that might just be... That's a personal preference thing. That's not... Like, they're not bad. The CGI is not bad. I just think there are parts at which it's a little too flashy. Like, they're clearly trying to make it more... They're trying to cover up for the fact that, you know, part of it had to be filmed in a pandemic, and that they were relying on, you know, actors who haven't done a whole lot of character acting before. Yeah. Yeah, I think we both prefer the old stuff. But that's right, it'll keep on. Whittaker is no longer the Doctor after this series, I believe. There's going to be another Doctor coming in, and then someone else takes over writing. So we're going to get, hopefully, different sorts of Doctor Who episodes, more like the originals. Well, not the original. Well, some of the originals actually, because he wrote. RTD wrote some of the original Doctor Who episodes, as in the very old school Doctor Who episodes. I love this song. But yeah, so that's what we've got to look forward to. So, you know, hold out, hold fast. Good things are come. Star Wars, there's another one. A lot of people enjoyed the new ones, including some of our closest buddies, but you don't like it at all. Gungans. Yeah, Gungans are terrible. A lot of people love them nowadays, but everybody hates them. But most people hated them to the point of bullying a guy within an inch of his life in the old days. Yes. Yeah, the bullying thing was not appropriate at all. I don't agree with bullying an actor, making fun of an actor based on a character they played, because they don't actually have as much say over that character as, you know, we otherwise might think they do. They're working within the confines of a script. They're working within the confines of, you know, the director's vision of how things are supposed to go. So yeah, that's a difficult one. The criticism around the Star Wars thing, I think there's a little bit of sexism involved in some of the criticism. I think there is some overbearing criticism, given that, you know, the original series had some of the same stupid shit. But at the same time, there is definitely some lazy fucking writing in there, and some stupid things that either A, didn't need to be that way, or, you know, were made that way for ideological reasons, rather than for story-based reasons. They ignored some of the lore on things, and it gets uncomfortable. But, you know, lots of people liked it. Calamity says, you love Jar Jar Binks and you hate Gungans. Fair. I would have... See, I'm the other way around. I think Gungans in general aren't actually as bad as, you know, we give them credit for. But Jar Jar Binks ruined it for everybody. Because Jar Jar Binks was a fuckhead. And he got so far being a fuckhead that just, you can't forgive any of the Gungans now because of his awfulness. I'm a terrible person. Like, he's an idiot. He's clearly mentally disturbed, and he ends up as, like, head of the Senate, or a chancellor, vice chancellor to the Senate. Fucking West. And it's just bad. Star Wars is a hard one though, because like I'm not a huge Star Wars. Like I like Star Wars. I absolutely do like Star Wars, but I'm just not as invested in it as a thing, as like some of the other people in our group and some of the other people that I know just love Star Wars way more than I do, and that's fine. Like that's reasonable, I think. Back on the hunt, all good. But yeah, the trouble with it is that there was a lot of discussion that was like shitting on Rey for being a Mary Sue. When other characters in the Star Wars series, in the Star Wars universe, have been fairly Mary Sue themselves. A lot of male characters as well. So it's a hard one to be like, well, where do we draw the line about what's appropriate? And I think the problem is that it was pushed so hard, and people had such a vested interest in it working, or such a vested interest in it going a particular way, that they just couldn't divorce the criticism from the person. And then there were also a significant amount of people who were literally just criticizing the actress, the actor and the writers and stuff like that, for her being a woman. Like there was a considerable lack of nuance in the criticism, and when that's what you see, when that's what you're hearing, it's hard not to have a knee-jerk reaction when someone has a criticism that sounds similar to the kinds of criticism that were being brought up at the same time as the sort of just straight up shitty stuff. And I think that's kind of where it's at with the Doctor as well at the moment, the Jodie Whittaker thing of like, there are legitimate criticisms you can make about the series. There are legitimate criticisms you can make about Jodie Whittaker's Doctor. But the fact that those same criticisms are made alongside, well, she's a woman and therefore it's never going to be good, means that like it's hard to take those criticisms seriously anymore, because they're just poison to the well, essentially. But I always try and have a nuanced approach to things. I always try and have a nuanced view about things. So that's why we're having this discussion in the first place. I was rewatching the series, and it seemed like the appropriate thing to bring up, that it's a current issue in pop culture. And my standpoint is not one or the other. It's in between, as my case usually is. I get a lot of shit from my partner. Because I kind of semi-label myself as a centrist. Not with like any level of seriousness, but kind of just like as a, I'm a centrist because I don't subscribe to the hard left or the hard right. I'm kind of, in between on certain issues, and I prefer a much more nuanced approach to a lot of these things. And I think, like, while we can say, yes, I agree with the premise of this point, I also don't agree with, you know, how it was done, or, you know, what comes afterwards, or what's added to that, or that we sort of have these discussions and we only hear one part of that. Like, you know, well, saying this thing is sexist or racist, or doing this thing is wrong. And then it's like, yeah, but also, there is also a bigger discussion that also needs to be had around that, of like linked things that are also important, or, you know, should also be condemned, or whatever, that aren't usually. I'm a huge advocate for the rights of men, especially in situations of like domestic violence and intimate partner violence, and sexual abuse and things like that, because of personal issues and situations I've been through, but also because there's just no recognition and discussion around that for most people, and specifically within like left-leaning circles. I also find that a lot of the time people will have these very unnuanced viewpoints and then will go back on them, will then sort of turn around and go back on them later. Why is it doing that? Oh, that's why it's doing that. And then go back on that position later because there we go. And then go back on that position later once you challenge them on it, because they do actually believe in the nuanced approach. It's just that, you know, they don't make it at the time. So an example of that, I don't know, I'm trying to think of something that doesn't stand on people's toes. The kind of the not all men thing, around the idea of like teaching men not to be rapists. Like, yes, at face value, I agree with that, but there's a significantly more nuanced conversation that has to happen. Women are also rapists. A fair amount of the time. It's not comparable. It's not like 50%. It's not 1-to-1. But it's enough that it's bad. And if we're talking about men as if every man should be, you know, more considerate and careful around women, and, you know, talking to all their male friends because some men are racist, some men are rapists, sorry, or sexual, or commit sexual assault, then should we not be saying the same thing about women because they also do the same thing? And then sort of that's where it becomes this sort of weird dynamic of like, no, it's, you know, there's men have the power, and, you know, men are overwhelmingly this and that and blah 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 blah, and then the conversation gets messy. So my viewpoint is I massively agree with the left-leaning viewpoint, but I prefer a more nuanced discussion about that. That annoys my partner because she's very left-leaning, particularly left-leaning. I think was probably more so when we first met, or at least more vocally so. But as we've sort of had discussions, she became more nuanced in her responses. I think probably because I kept, you know, challenging her and bringing up things, and she would get annoyed about the fact that I would challenge her on things and try and have a nuanced position because it was dismissing the point she was making. That's totally reasonable and totally fair, and I should be more careful about these things. Try to be. But it also doesn't ignore the fact that a lot of the discussion that we end up having is kind of around this idea that that a lot of these issues end up sort of being one-sided, that there are two sides to this conversation, and we only ever really talk about one until I bring up the other side of the issue. There is some things there where I need to speak up about my issues, or the issues that I think are important as well. And yeah, reasonable. Fair enough. But in that kind of discussion, there's also... Turn down the hardness. There we go. But then sort of within that idea as well, there's sort of a thing of like, at the moment, and it's easier for her to talk about her things. Her things are accepted more to a certain degree. They get talked about a lot more socially, just generally speaking. Yeah, that's not her fault that men's issues don't get talked about. But there is a level of sort of societal pushback that is difficult to deal with, and so, you know, there aren't good men's groups. Because a lot of them are full of shitty incels, and that's a problem. And there's a thing of like, yeah, we should work on making spaces and pushing those people out. But then when those spaces, you know, do get made, there's pushback from, you know, women's groups and things like that. It's a whole... This is a whole long thing that might be another stream. Another uncomfortable stream that I shouldn't have. But yeah, I'm a huge advocate for men's issues, so that is a thing. It's a thing that's important to me. Another interesting discussion topic, I guess, one that probably should be had at some point, but it just occurred to me now in talking about how I am an advocate for men's issues. This body type here is entirely unrealistic for most men. It's actually a kind of shitty thing that is pushed in society as a whole. I'm only doing it literally because I'm trying to cash in on the want for this, specifically from women. Because the whole, like, it's a pinup for women. And yeah, this is not a power fantasy thing. I would hate to look like this. That I when I was younger, I had a want to, but the only reason I had that want is because there were a group of girls who told me it was hot, and that they wanted me to be like that. Other than that, I have no want to look like this. There is a great video going around of like, it's a meme type thing. It's a guy, big chunky, like proper weightlifter, not like a gym junkie weightlifter, not a bodybuilder, but like someone who has a huge pot belly, but like fucking ripped muscles, like huge pecs, huge biceps, like mass on his body, like fucking muscle. And he goes, I don't want to be, I don't want to be strong like a bodybuilder or something. I want to be strong like a bear in a forest who keeps being attacked by really muscular women, which is callback to another meme. But it's that idea of the power fantasy is not this body. The power fantasy is being able to lift a fucking truck. Like being able to be strong enough to do that. I don't want to be lean. I want to be fucking massive. That would be nice. I would go to the gym to do just that. I don't, because I'm a lazy shit and because I'm an artist. So I spend a lot of my time making art rather than sculpting my body. One day I will potentially move towards that. I did when I was younger. I was a little more obsessed with it than I should be. Because hey, body dysmorphia is a thing in boys too. And at the moment it's about 50-50 men and women. Young boys and young girls, body dysmorphia is about 50-50. As in 50% women and 50% men. Or boys and girls in this case. And it's a pretty fucking big issue at the moment. It's causing a lot of suicides, and because suicides in males is higher than it is in women, it's causing some troubles. Anyway, the point being that a lot of this stuff is pointed out as like, oh, but that's the male fantasy, this body type. And I actually don't think it is, because I've only ever heard, with very few exceptions, women gushing over this body type and not men. The men that I've heard talking about, wanting abs, they want abs to get women, because that's what women want, not because they themselves want to have abs. And you know, you can make the same argument about the skinny supermodel girl type thing. But the weird thing in that argument is that most guys are like, no, I want this. I want not like overweight, but like a curvy girl. I want boobs, I want ass, I want like thick thighs, I want a little bit of a belly. Yeah, all of that is nice. That's what we want, that's what men want. That's not all men. And it's definitely not what is portrayed in popular culture. And that's why it's shitty. That's why it's so fucking annoying of these things of like, young men and young women see these things and they think that's what is expected of them. And it's not at all, because most people don't actually want that. Women tell men all the time they want dad bods. In my various escapades in the world of dating, can tell you that's not always the case. In fact, kind of not the case a lot of the time. Especially if you look at how overweight women versus overweight men get treated on like dating sites and sort of socially. There's a dynamic there that, you know, we should probably look at. But then also everybody treats larger people shit, and that's not okay. And everybody has issues with, or faces issues with how society places pressure on us to look a particular way. And it would be great if we could get over that as a society. If we could just be like, yeah, no, that doesn't actually work for us anymore. This is kind of stupid that we keep pushing these body types that are unrealistic, or these body types that aren't actually, you know, preferential for most people. I know very few people who are actually into the supermodel thing. I know very few men who, other than for the reason that they've been told this is what women like, want to look like this, like a fucking bodybuilder. But if you do, all power to you. You know, don't let me crush your dreams. I don't think anybody here is coming here for my great advice about things, so. Anyway, we're getting closer and closer to this being done. I'm gonna finish off just adding in some extra shadow here, some extra definition, and then we're going to work on darkening the background a little bit, and then I think we will either then raid out to someone or work on some emojis. Because I've got one more slot to fill up, and I've got a an animated emote. Let's take this back a little. There we go. Your emissary hunting for season deeds. We've managed to take 3 flags. Congratulations. That is impressive. Nice work, buddy. The only trouble is trying to keep them, I'm assuming. You need to sell them while flying the Reaper's flag, and the last one you forgot to vote Reapers back up. So you may need more. That's annoying. Can you collect them and then put up a Reaper's flag and then sell? Or does it not count? It's good you don't have to do them all at once. That would fucking suck. Alright, let's zoom out a little. This is looking nice. This is looking good. We're going to turn the opacity down and the size way up. And I think we're going to just darken in here a little. Turn the hardness 50%. That's a little better. Probably could just have darkened the whole background here a little, but I do kind of want to vignette it a little, which is to darken the edges and then have the center be light, the center point. Oh. Pardon. And then what we'll do is we'll blur. We want to blur just this layer, so let's see if we get rid of all of this, and then blur just this. You can sail dark and then vote your flag up. Cool. Sounds like good fun. Alright, let's chuck everybody back on. Did this blur everything else as well? Am I going to be super unhappy about this in a second? No, perfect. That's interesting though. We did some high detail in there. Here's our shadow. Here's our color. So even without our color, that's the amount of definition we've got on this bad boy. There we go. Drop shadow, background color. And these are our two here. So we've got a lot more definition in this one. It's a lot darker. Our lovely Morel. Hey, self-care. Make sure you're looking after yourselves. Oh, I accidentally closed the red cap. That's all right. That's looking pretty good. I'm happy with that. I think we're going to save that. I don't think we're going to change the color of this one too much. We might try and enhance some of the colors, but we'll see how we go. So this is Mushlad Morel.